Nicholas Vaughn had it all: wealth, power, a new life of luxury. But as he sipped champagne in the Maldives, a breaking news alert shattered his illusion of victory. His ex-wife, the woman he underestimated, had just become one of the richest women in the country by outmaneuvering him. The jet sliced through the evening sky, its sleek body reflecting the deep hues of the setting sun. Nicholas Vaughn stretched in his seat, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of his whiskey glass as the aircraft began its descent. Below him, the Maldives sprawled in pristine beauty, emerald green islands scattered across the Indian Ocean, each one a perfect vision of paradise. This was exactly what he needed. 3 months had passed since his divorce from Victoria Hastings, and though he never doubted his decision, he was more than ready to put the last remnants of that chapter behind him. The legal process had been tedious, but ultimately, he walked away victorious. He had given Victoria a settlement large enough to shut her up, but insignificant enough to be forgotten within a week. He never once believed she would pose any threat to him. She wasn't built for this world. She had spent years riding on his coattails, playing the part of the supportive wife while he conquered the business world. Now, she was just another ex-wife with a fat bank account and nothing else. Beside him, Bella lounged across the plush leather, scrolling through her phone, occasionally laughing at something on social media. She was young, vibrant, effortlessly beautiful, a far cry from Victoria's composed and calculating demeanor. Nicholas had no patience for complicated women anymore. He had spent enough time dealing with Victoria's sharp tongue and her endless questions, her insistence on being involved in things that were beyond her grasp. Bella, on the other hand, was easy. She was here for the fun, the luxury, and the privilege of being with him. No expectations, no obligations. Just pleasure. "You look awfully deep in thought," Bella mused, setting her phone down and leaning into him. "Second thoughts about running off with me?" Nicholas smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Not in the slightest." She smiled, satisfied, and stretched her arms above her head. "Good, because I've been waiting for this trip forever, and I expect to be spoiled." He chuckled, setting his glass down. "Trust me, sweetheart, you'll get more than you bargained for." The moment they landed, a private car whisked them away to one of the most exclusive resorts in the Maldives, a secluded paradise where each villa stretched over the turquoise waters, offering absolute privacy and indulgence. Nicholas had spared no expense, booking the most luxurious villa available. The open-air design allowed the cool sea breeze to filter through the space, the infinity pool seamlessly blending into the horizon. Everything was tailored to perfection. Bella wasted no time, slipping out of her travel attire and into a silk robe as she padded barefoot across the deck. "This is insane," she murmured, running her fingers along the edge of the glass railing. "I could get used to this." Nicholas stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, watching the waves crash gently beneath them. "That's the point," he said, his voice smooth and self-assured. As the evening unfolded, the resort staff ensured that no detail was overlooked. A private chef prepared an exquisite meal, the table set with candles flickering against the backdrop of the moonlit ocean. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, watching Bella swirl her wine, her laughter blending with the distant sound of the waves. "You know," she said, tilting her head, "I read something interesting earlier." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not particularly concerned. "Oh," she smirked. "People are still talking about your divorce." Nicholas scoffed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Let them. People love a good story, even when it's old news." Bella rested her chin on her hand. "So, no regrets?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "None." Bella studied him for a moment before letting out a soft chuckle. "Must be nice, being so sure of yourself all the time." Nicholas smirked, leaning forward. "It's not about being sure of myself, darling. It's about knowing when you've won." She hummed thoughtfully, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "You do love winning, don't you?" Nicholas exhaled, stretching his arms behind his head. "It's all I know." The evening carried on in indulgent excess, the two of them sinking deeper into the intoxicating world of wealth and luxury. Nicholas felt untouchable, as he always had. The world was his, and he dictated the terms. But even in the midst of paradise, there was a nagging itch at the back of his mind. Not regret, not doubt, but something else. Something unspoken, lingering just beneath the surface. Perhaps it was the finality of it all. The knowledge that Victoria was truly gone from his life. He had spent years in a marriage that was, at best, a carefully managed arrangement, and at worst, a power struggle disguised as a partnership. And yet, now that it was over, there was an odd sense of dissonance. Not loss, just an absence. He dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. Bella stood, stretching languidly before slipping into the infinity pool, the water glowing with soft blue lights. "Are you just going to sit there all night? Or are you going to join me?" she teased. Nicholas smirked, standing and unbuttoning his shirt. "I suppose I could make an exception." As the night wore on, Nicholas allowed himself to sink fully into the pleasure of the moment. The past was behind him, and the future was exactly as he had designed it. At least, that's what he believed. Because in another part of the world, far from the idyllic waters of the Maldives, a name he thought he had left behind was making its way back into the conversation. And soon enough, Nicholas Vaughn would learn that the past had a way of rewriting itself in ways he never could have predicted. But for now, he remained blissfully unaware, the king of his own carefully constructed empire. For now, what would you do if the person you thought you left behind came back more powerful than ever? Drop a comment and let me know. Would you fight back or accept defeat? And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see how this story unfolds. Nicholas Vaughn woke to the rhythmic sound of waves gently crashing against the wooden stilts of the villa, the soft morning light filtering through the sheer curtains that swayed with the ocean breeze. The air smelled of salt and coconut, a scent that should have been nothing but soothing. But even as he stretched, rolling onto his side, something unsettled stirred within him. Bella was still asleep, sprawled across the bed with the sheets loosely draped over her body, her golden hair fanning out over the silk pillowcase. He should have felt nothing but satisfaction. After all, this was exactly the life he had envisioned for himself post-divorce. No obligations, no power struggles, just indulgence. Yet, as he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and reached for his phone, that strange, unshakable feeling lingered. Unlocking the screen, he scrolled absent-mindedly through emails and notifications, barely processing the information until a certain headline made his grip on the device tighten. Victoria Hastings signs multi-billion-dollar deal, now among the wealthiest women in the country. Nicholas blinked, his brain taking an extra second to register what he was seeing. The article's opening line confirmed it. His ex-wife, Victoria, the woman he had dismissed as unambitious, had just made a move so colossal that it sent shockwaves through the financial world. He read further, his stomach tightening as each sentence unfolded the details. Victoria had finalized a deal that positioned her as a major power player, her company securing partnerships with key investors and industry giants. The settlement he had given her, the one he had arrogantly tossed her way as if it were an afterthought, had been turned into something formidable. Nicholas barely noticed that Bella had stirred awake, rolling onto her side to look at him through sleepy, half-lidded eyes. "You're up early," she murmured, voice laced with grogginess. She pushed herself up on one elbow, glancing at the screen still illuminated in his hand. Something wrong? His jaw tensed. He debated brushing it off, but Bella wasn't an idiot. She might play the part of carefree and detached, but she had an eye for tension, and right now, he was exuding it in waves. She sat up fully, pulling the sheets around her as she scooted closer, her lips curving in amusement. "Oh," she breathed, her gaze flicking back to the headline. "Now that is interesting." Nicholas didn't answer, his mind racing as he scrolled further. Victoria had been strategic, calculated. She had waited. She had known exactly when to strike. His pulse pounded in his ears. The article elaborated on her sharp business acumen, detailing how she had spent the last few months making silent but significant moves. Moves that no one, especially him, had seen coming. His grip tightened on the phone as he reached the last few paragraphs. Her latest investment? A majority stake in Blackburn Industries. Nicholas inhaled sharply. Blackburn, his biggest competitor. The one company that had been nipping at his heels for years, waiting for an opportunity to challenge him in ways no other corporation had dared. He had spent years keeping them at bay, ensuring their growth remained stunted, that they never had the resources to truly threaten him. And now, thanks to Victoria, they did. Bella let out a soft whistle, lazily stretching her arms before slipping out of bed. "Didn't you say she wasn't cut out for this world?" she teased, padding toward the coffee machine in nothing but the silk sheet wrapped around her. Nicholas finally lowered the phone, exhaling through his nose. She wasn't. Bella poured herself a cup of coffee, smirking over the rim of the mug. "Well, looks like she is now." His gaze snapped to her, sharp and irritated. But she only sipped her drink, unbothered. He turned his attention back to his phone, switching to his emails. He needed information. There had to be some mistake. There was no way Victoria had orchestrated something of this magnitude on her own. He had known her too well. She was intelligent, sure, but she had never been a risk-taker, never possessed the kind of ruthlessness required to pull off a move like this. Something didn't add up. His CFO had already sent him a brief report, concise, but with enough information to confirm the nightmare was real. Victoria hadn't just invested in Blackburn. She had secured exclusive partnerships, making it nearly impossible for Nicholas to counter her moves without suffering major losses. He felt his fingers twitch against the screen. No, this wasn't how things worked. He was the one who dictated the terms, the one who made the first move. Victoria was supposed to be nothing more than a footnote in his story, a closed chapter neatly filed away. He stood abruptly, grabbing his robe and stepping out onto the villa's private deck. The horizon stretched infinitely before him, the crystal-clear waters calm and undisturbed, completely unaware of the storm raging inside his head. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had spent years building his empire, making calculated decisions, always staying ahead of the curve. He had anticipated everything, every competitor, every market shift, every economic fluctuation, but never once had he accounted for her. Bella stepped out behind him, cradling her coffee, the morning sunlight catching the strands of her hair. "You look like a man who just realized he made a terrible mistake." Nicholas clenched his jaw. "I didn't make a mistake." She tilted her head, amused. "Are you sure? Because from where I'm standing, it kind of looks like you underestimated her. And now," she gestured vaguely toward his phone, "now she's the one making headlines while you're halfway across the world, trying to forget she exists." He turned his gaze to her, unreadable. Bella was enjoying this too much. She smiled, stepping closer, her voice laced with something almost condescending. "Still think leaving her was a good idea?" Nicholas didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. The past he had so confidently walked away from was no longer behind him. It had found its way back, rewritten itself into something he never saw coming. And as he stood there, the realization settled in, cold and sharp. Victoria hadn't just moved on. She had outmaneuvered him. She was playing the game now. And this time, he was the one struggling to keep up. Nicholas Vaughn had never been the kind of man to dwell on the past. The moment a deal was done, a competitor crushed, or an inconvenience removed, he moved on without a second thought. Regret was for weaker men, for those who lacked the resolve to forge ahead no matter the cost. That was why the feeling gnawing at him now, the slow-burning irritation laced with something dangerously close to unease, was so unfamiliar. He had spent the entire morning in silence, pacing along the edge of the infinity pool, his phone in hand, reading and rereading the details of Victoria's deal. Blackburn Industries. Of all the companies she could have aligned herself with, she had chosen the one he had worked hardest to suppress. It wasn't just an investment, it was an act of war. The more he thought about it, the more absurd it became. Victoria had never been a risk-taker. She had been composed, methodical, even brilliant in certain ways, but she had never been aggressive. She had preferred order, stability. During their marriage, she had always been the one urging caution when he made bold moves. She valued strategy, but she never initiated. She played the long game, yes, but she had never been the one to flip the board entirely. Nicholas had always thought of her as someone who supported power rather than someone who wielded it. And yet, here she was, publicly, deliberately, and undeniably asserting herself as a force to be reckoned with. His grip on his phone tightened. Bella, draped in a silk robe, strolled onto the deck, stretching her arms above her head before settling onto one of the cushioned lounge chairs. She had been watching him all morning, offering occasional glances of amusement as he spiraled deeper into whatever storm was brewing in his mind. Now, she rested her chin in her hand, studying him with open curiosity. You know, she mused, for a man who claims he doesn't care, you're sure acting like someone who cares a lot. Nicholas exhaled sharply through his nose, turning his phone screen off before setting it on the table beside him. I don't care. Bella smirked. Right. Silence stretched between them, the only sound the distant crash of waves and the occasional chirp of seabirds gliding over the water. Nicholas leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his fingers interlocked as he stared at the horizon. I just don't understand how she pulled this off, he muttered, more to himself than to Bella. Maybe you never really understood her, Bella offered casually, sipping her coffee. Nicholas shot her a look, but she only shrugged, unbothered. Think about it, she continued. You spent years with her, right? But from what I've gathered, you always saw her as an accessory to your success. A supportive figure, not a player in her own right. Maybe she was always capable of this, and you were just too busy underestimating her to notice. The words settled uncomfortably in his chest. Nicholas prided himself on knowing people, on understanding what made them tick, what they were capable of, where their limits lay. He had built his empire on that knowledge, navigating negotiations and corporate battles with a sharp eye for weaknesses. And yet, somehow, he had miscalculated Victoria. It wasn't just that she had built something for herself. It was how she had done it, silently, strategically, while he had been too busy indulging in his own self-satisfaction to notice. His mind drifted back to their marriage, the countless conversations they had shared, the moments he had dismissed as unimportant. He had always known Victoria was sharp, but he had assumed she lacked the hunger required to truly dominate. She had challenged him at times, but never in ways that made him see her as an actual threat. Had she been hiding this side of herself all along? Or had something changed in her after the divorce? Bella stretched out her legs, watching him with thinly veiled amusement. So, what's the plan then? Are you just going to sit here, brooding, while she takes over your world? Nicholas's jaw tightened. That wasn't an option. He picked up his phone again, quickly scrolling through his contacts before selecting the name he needed. The line rang twice before a voice answered on the other end. Mason, I need a full report on Victoria Hastings. Everything. I want to know every move she's made since the divorce, every meeting, every contact, every financial transaction. If she so much as bought a coffee from a new cafe, I want to know why. Mason, his right-hand man when it came to handling discreet business matters, responded without hesitation. Understood. I'll have the first wave of information to you within the hour. Nicholas ended the call without another word, his mind already working through the next steps. He wasn't going to sit back and let Victoria blindside him. He needed to understand her game. Bella sighed, standing and making her way over to him, draping her arms loosely around his shoulders from behind. You know, there's something kind of sexy about watching you scramble, she teased, pressing a light kiss to the side of his neck. Nicholas didn't react, his mind elsewhere. She laughed softly. Just don't let this obsession get in the way of our fun. He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze. This isn't an obsession. It's business. Bella arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. If you say so. As the sun climbed higher, Nicholas sat in silence, his thoughts spiraling into places he hadn't dared explore before. He had always considered himself untouchable, a master of his domain. But Victoria had changed the rules of the game without him even realizing it. And that meant only one thing. He needed to regain control. By the time Mason's report came in, Nicholas was more than ready to dissect every piece of information. As he scrolled through the initial findings, his stomach tightened. Victoria hadn't just built a business. She had built an empire. And she had done it right under his nose. Nicholas Vaughn had built his empire on the principle of control. Control over markets, control over competitors, control over the very perception of power. And yet, as he sat in the open-air lounge of his private villa, staring at the glowing screen of his phone, he felt something foreign creeping into his chest. A slow, simmering unease, one he hadn't experienced in years. The more he read, the deeper it settled, sinking its claws into him with each line of text. Victoria had played him. It wasn't just an investment. It wasn't just a simple move to secure financial independence. This was warfare. She had waited, calculated, and executed a plan that had left him exposed in a way he hadn't even seen coming. She had spent months building alliances, forming strategic partnerships, ensuring that every door she opened for herself was one that closed in his face. The settlement he had so carelessly handed over to her, the money he had considered a mere footnote in his life, had been the very weapon she used to position herself at the top. He had always believed that Victoria lacked the ruthless edge required to play this game at his level. And yet, here she was, not just playing, but winning. His grip on the phone tightened. Across from him, Bella stretched lazily in the sun, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his eyes. She had noticed his shift in demeanor since breakfast, had even prodded him about it in her usual teasing way, but he had brushed her off, unwilling to entertain her amusement at his expense. "Still brooding?" she finally asked, tilting her sunglasses down to look at him. "This is getting a little pathetic, babe." Nicholas didn't respond. His mind was elsewhere, working through the information Mason had sent, searching for gaps, weaknesses, something that would give him an edge. Blackburn Industries. For years, they had been an afterthought, a nuisance, at most. He had made it his mission to suppress their growth, ensuring that they never became a real threat to his empire. And yet, somehow, in a matter of months, Victoria had turned them into a powerhouse. She hadn't just aligned with them, she had become them. Nicholas scrolled through the breakdown of her holdings, his stomach tightening with each figure. Blackburn's stock had surged overnight. Investors who had once flocked to him were now shifting their attention, some even pulling out of negotiations they had been pursuing with his firm. He had built a reputation as an untouchable force in the business world, but now that perception was cracking, and perception was everything. He exhaled slowly, forcing his expression into something neutral as he set the phone down. He wouldn't allow Bella or anyone else to see how much this was affecting him. "You know," Bella mused, adjusting the strap of her swimsuit, "I thought this was supposed to be a vacation, but you've been glued to that phone all morning. Starting to feel like I'm on a solo trip." Nicholas shot her a look, unimpressed. "Maybe you should find ways to entertain yourself." She smirked, unbothered. "Oh, I have plenty of ways, but watching you unravel is far more entertaining." He clenched his jaw, unwilling to take the bait. "I'm not unraveling," she hummed, sipping from her drink before setting it down. "No? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your ex-wife just made a move that has you rethinking some of your life choices." He exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders back. "This is business. Nothing more." Bella leaned forward, resting her chin in her palm. "If you say so. But I have to admit, it's kind of impressive. She was never on your level when you were together, but now," she gestured vaguely toward his phone, "now she's out there making headlines while you're thousands of miles away, trying to convince yourself you're still in control." Nicholas turned his gaze toward the ocean, refusing to let her words sink in. The truth was, Bella had no idea what she was talking about. Victoria hadn't just caught up to him. She had forced him into reacting instead of leading, and that was something he never allowed himself to do. He needed to regain control, needed to remind the world exactly who Nicholas Vaughn was. His phone buzzed again. Another email. Another reminder that the world wasn't waiting for him to make his next move. He tapped the screen, scanning the latest update from his PR team. Investors were already talking. Analysts were speculating about what this meant for his company. Some were even questioning whether he had lost his edge. That was unacceptable. His grip on the phone tightened. He had spent years cultivating an image of dominance, of power so absolute that no one dared challenge him. Victoria was threatening that. And if he allowed this narrative to gain momentum, it would only snowball. Nicholas stood abruptly, his mind made up. Bella raised an eyebrow. "Where are you going?" He buttoned his linen shirt, reaching for his sunglasses. I need to make some calls. Bella smirked. Damage control? Nicholas shot her a warning look. Handling business. She chuckled, reclining back onto the lounge chair. Sure. Keep telling yourself that. He ignored her, stepping inside the villa. The moment he was alone, he dialed Mason again. The call connected instantly. Mason, Nicholas said, his voice sharp. I need you to set up a meeting with the board. Today. Virtual, in person, I don't care how you do it. I need them aligned before the markets open tomorrow. Yes, sir, Mason responded immediately. Should I also loop in the PR team? We've been getting media inquiries. Yes, Nicholas cut in. I want full control over the narrative. No speculation, no uncertainty. Victoria's move is nothing more than an overhyped PR stunt, and I want every outlet to reflect that by the end of the day. Mason hesitated. Sir, with all due respect, I don't think that's how the market is seeing it. Nicholas's jaw clenched. Then make them see it that way. Another pause. Nicholas exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. What aren't you telling me? Mason sighed. Sir, the board is concerned, not just about the stock hit, but about you. The perception of your leadership. Nicholas froze. They need reassurance, Mason continued carefully. And I think that means you need to handle this directly. Nicholas inhaled deeply, his mind racing. If the board was questioning him, then the damage was already beginning to spread. He needed to be there. In person. His fingers tightened around the phone. Mason, he said slowly, his voice cool and controlled, book me a flight back to New York. Tonight. The private jet sliced through the sky with its usual effortless grace, but for the first time in a long time, Nicholas Vaughn felt like he wasn't the one in control. He stared out the window as the city lights of New York flickered in the distance, his mind churning through 1,000 different scenarios. The jet's interior was silent except for the occasional clink of ice in his glass as he swirled the whiskey absent-mindedly. The drink had lost its taste, but he kept sipping, as if the burn down his throat would somehow drown out the unease creeping into his chest. Victoria had orchestrated this perfectly. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as just another woman content with financial security rather than power. He had assumed she would disappear into the background, take her settlement, and live a life of quiet luxury like so many others before her. But she had done the opposite. She had spent every moment since their divorce positioning herself for a move he never saw coming. And now, she wasn't just a name in the industry. She was the name. Nicholas clenched his jaw. He could already picture the conversations happening in private rooms, behind closed doors. Executives whispering about whether this was the beginning of something new, whether Victoria Hastings was the future while Nicholas Vaughn was the past. The thought alone was enough to send a rush of anger through him. He wasn't a man who let things slip through his fingers. He wasn't a man who reacted. He dictated, controlled, set the pace. Yet here he was, flying back to New York not because he wanted to, but because he had to. The descent into the city was smooth, but his thoughts were anything but. As soon as the jet landed at Teterboro, his driver was already waiting with the Rolls-Royce idling on the tarmac. He stepped into the car without a word, the city skyline looming in the distance like a battlefield waiting for his arrival. The air inside the vehicle was thick with silence, but his phone was anything but quiet. Mason's voice came through as soon as the call connected. The board is expecting you first thing in the morning. They want answers. They'll get them, Nicholas said, his voice steady, betraying none of the tension thrumming beneath his skin. There's more. Mason hesitated for a fraction of a second. Victoria's appearance at the gala isn't just symbolic. She set up private meetings with several of our key investors. Some of them are reconsidering their alignment. Nicholas exhaled slowly, controlling the surge of irritation that flared in his chest. Who? A few names we expected, Mason admitted. But there are also surprises. High-profile clients who wouldn't have dared entertain an alternative to you a year ago. Nicholas tilted his head back against the leather seat, his fingers pressing against his temple. It was worse than he thought. Victoria wasn't just making waves. She was restructuring the entire current of the industry, forcing people to reconsider their loyalties. This had to end. By the time he reached his penthouse, It was past midnight, but the city below was still alive, humming with energy. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the whiskey in his glass barely touched as he scanned the skyline. He had built this city in his own way, had made his name synonymous with power. The idea that Victoria was challenging that wasn't just frustrating. It was unacceptable. He didn't sleep that night. The board meeting the next morning was exactly what he expected. Veiled concerns wrapped in professional courtesy, questions that sounded like curiosity but were really doubts in disguise. Nicholas handled it the way he handled everything, with unwavering authority. He reassured them, reminded them why they had chosen to align themselves with him in the first place. By the time the meeting ended, the tension had eased, but he knew it wasn't over. The real challenge was yet to come. The gala was one of those events that blurred the line between business and spectacle, a room filled with power, money, and influence. Every conversation was a negotiation, every handshake a silent deal. Nicholas arrived late on purpose. If people were going to talk, he wanted to make sure they were talking about him. The moment he stepped inside, he felt it. The shift. Eyes flicked toward him, conversations briefly pausing before resuming in hushed tones. It was subtle, but he knew. And then he saw her. Victoria stood near the center of the room, effortlessly commanding the space in a way that sent a sharp sting through his pride. She had always been striking, but tonight, she was something more. Poised, confident, untouchable. She wore a dress that was the perfect balance of elegance and dominance. A deep emerald silk that hugged her figure, the color chosen deliberately, he was sure, because she knew exactly how well it suited her. She wasn't hiding. She was owning the room. People weren't just looking at her. They were gravitating toward her. She was laughing at something, her head tilted slightly, eyes bright with amusement. And then, as if she had felt his presence, she turned. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the rest of the room faded. Nicholas kept his expression unreadable, unwilling to be the first to react. Victoria's lips curved, not into a smile, but something more calculated, something that felt like a private challenge. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked like she had expected this. That realization sent another wave of irritation through him. She held his gaze for a second longer before turning back to her conversation, dismissing him without a word. Nicholas exhaled slowly, setting his drink down with more force than necessary. She was playing the game well, too well, but this wasn't over. If Victoria thought she could rewrite the narrative, she was about to be reminded exactly who she was dealing with. Nicholas Vaughn didn't lose. And tonight, he was going to make sure everyone knew it. Nicholas Vaughn wasn't a man who second-guessed himself. He made decisions, and the world adjusted accordingly. That had always been the way of things. Yet, standing in the grand ballroom, watching Victoria Hastings move through the crowd like a queen who had just claimed her throne, there was a nagging voice in the back of his mind, one that refused to be silenced. He had seen powerful women before, had sat across from them in boardrooms, shaken their hands in deals worth billions, watched them rise and fall. But this was different. This wasn't a rival he had underestimated. This was her. He didn't just see her success, he felt it. It was in the way people gravitated toward her, how conversations momentarily paused when she walked past, how men who had once deferred to Nicholas were now turning their attention elsewhere. She wasn't asking for respect, she was commanding it. And that should have meant nothing to him, but it did. He lifted his whiskey glass to his lips, taking a slow sip, allowing the burn to ground him. He had come here to send a message, to remind everyone, including Victoria, that Nicholas Vaughn was still the most powerful name in the room. Yet, for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if that was true. Bella's voice cut through his thoughts before he had the chance to suppress them. "You're staring," she mused, appearing at his side with the practiced ease of someone who thrived in the company of powerful men. Nicholas didn't react immediately, his gaze still fixed on Victoria, watching as she laughed lightly at something an investor said. The ease in her expression, the quiet confidence. It was deliberate, a performance designed to make it clear that she wasn't just surviving without him. She was thriving. Bella followed his line of sight and smirked. "I have to admit, she's good. Even I didn't think she had this in her." Nicholas exhaled slowly, setting his glass down on a nearby tray. She got lucky, Bella hummed, tilting her head. Is that what we're calling it now? Nicholas turned to her then, finally giving her his attention, but Bella didn't shrink under his gaze. If anything, she looked amused. That irritated him more than anything. What are you getting at, Bella? He asked coolly. She swirled her champagne lazily in her glass before taking a small sip. Just making an observation. I've seen you in a lot of rooms like this with a lot of different people, but I don't think I've ever seen you look at someone quite like that. Nicholas smirked, shaking his head. You're imagining things. Bella leaned in slightly, her perfume heady and expensive, but tonight, it didn't have its usual effect on him. Am I? He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Bella had always been good at reading between the lines, and right now, she was enjoying herself far too much. She glanced back toward Victoria, watching as she effortlessly commanded a conversation with some of the most influential men in the industry. If you had known she was capable of this, Bella mused, would you have let her go so easily? Nicholas felt something tighten in his chest, something dangerously close to frustration. He had built his life on control, on always being the one pulling the strings. The idea that he had been played, that he had been the one outmaneuvered, didn't sit well with him. Bella smirked at his silence. That's what I thought. Nicholas clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly through his nose before turning toward the bar. I need another drink. But Bella wasn't done. As he moved, she followed, her voice turning almost lazy, teasing. You know, it's funny. The way you look at her. It's different. Nicholas paused mid-step. Bella stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough so only he could hear. You never looked at me like that. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, a smirk curved at the corner of his lips. He turned just enough to meet her gaze, the amusement in his eyes cold and sharp. That's because you were never on her level. Bella's expression faltered. Just for a second, just long enough for Nicholas to see the flicker of something ugly beneath the surface. And just like that, the game shifted again. She recovered quickly, of course. She always did. Bella was good at pretending, at playing the role of the woman who didn't care, but Nicholas had built his empire on reading people, and right now, he knew exactly what he had just done. He had wounded her. She wouldn't forget that. Bella let out a soft, humorless laugh, shaking her head slightly. Ouch, she murmured, sipping her champagne. That's cold, even for you. Nicholas didn't respond. He didn't need to, because in that moment, he realized something else. Bella was no longer an asset. She was a liability. And liabilities were things Nicholas Vaughn didn't keep around for long. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced conversations and strategic maneuvering. But no matter how many hands he shook or how many deals he subtly pushed forward, the weight of the night clung to him. By the time they left the gala, stepping into the sleek black car waiting outside, Bella's demeanor had shifted. She wasn't sulking, that wasn't her style. But she wasn't pleased either. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words and lingering tension. She crossed her legs, her fingers drumming lightly against the leather seat. So, she said after a long moment, her tone too casual to be genuine. What happens now? Nicholas exhaled, leaning his head back against the seat. What do you mean? Bella turned her head toward him, watching him carefully. With her. With Victoria. You're not just going to let this go, are you? Nicholas didn't answer immediately. He knew Bella was fishing, trying to gauge just how much this entire situation was getting under his skin. And the truth was, he didn't know what happened next. What he did know was that this wasn't over. Victoria had made her move. Now, it was his turn. The car pulled up to the entrance of his penthouse, and as Nicholas stepped out, he didn't bother glancing back at Bella. He had more important things to deal with. Because the moment he walked through those doors, his mind was already focused on the next step. And this time, he wasn't going to let Victoria catch him off guard again. Nicholas Vaughn had never been the kind of man to sit idly by while someone else dictated the rules of the game. He built his empire on control, on foresight, on always being the one who decided the outcome before anyone else had even realized there was a game to be played. But now, for the first time in years, he found himself on the defensive, reacting instead of leading. It was a position he refused to accept. As the car carried him through the quiet streets of Manhattan, the city lights casting fleeting reflections against the tinted windows. Nicholas sat in silence, his fingers drumming impatiently against the leather seat. The gala had been a spectacle, a grand display of influence where Victoria had made it abundantly clear that she was no longer standing in his shadow. She had orchestrated it perfectly, positioning herself as a dominant force in the industry, securing alliances he hadn't even realized were slipping through his fingers, making him look like the one who had fallen behind. It wasn't just her success that stung. It was the fact that he hadn't seen it coming. That would never happen again. The moment he stepped into his penthouse, he was already dialing Mason. The call connected almost instantly. "Sir," Mason greeted, his voice sharp, professional. He had been waiting. "Tell me exactly where we stand," Nicholas ordered, shrugging out of his suit jacket and tossing it onto the couch. "I don't want a recap. I want leverage." There was a brief pause before Mason responded. "Victoria's position is solid. She didn't just buy into Blackburn. She secured it. She's got long-term contracts in place, supplier exclusivity agreements, and strategic partnerships that make it difficult for us to counter without suffering significant losses." Nicholas exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back. "And the board? They're watching," Mason admitted. "The investors are still loyal for now, but the longer this narrative lingers, the harder it'll be to maintain that loyalty. People are starting to ask questions. They want to know how you're going to respond." Nicholas smirked coldly. "Then let's give them something to talk about." He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city stretching beneath him. His mind was already working through possibilities, dissecting the situation the way he would a high-stakes negotiation. Victoria had played her hand well, but she wasn't untouchable. No one was. "What are our options?" he asked, his voice measured. Mason hesitated for a fraction of a second. "We could initiate a buyout attempt, but given the structure of her holdings, it would require significant capital and would likely trigger regulatory scrutiny. There's also the risk of a public battle, which could damage your image further." Nicholas's jaw tightened. That wasn't an option. He wasn't about to engage in a corporate war that would make him look desperate. He needed something cleaner. Then what? There was another brief pause. Then Mason's voice dropped slightly, more cautious. "There's one possibility, but it's risky." Nicholas's eyes darkened. "Explain." "If we can undermine her key partnerships, specifically the investors she's aligned herself with, we might be able to force a restructuring of her holdings," Mason said carefully. "It wouldn't be immediate, and it wouldn't be public, but over time, we could make it significantly more difficult for her to maintain control." Nicholas smirked. Now they were talking. "Who are the weak links?" "Jameson and Pierce," Mason responded immediately. "They were hesitant about aligning with her from the start. If we offer them something better, they might be willing to shift their support back to you." Nicholas's fingers tapped lightly against the glass. "Set up a meeting. Discreet. I don't want this getting out before we have a commitment." "Understood." Nicholas ended the call, his mind already shifting toward the next steps. This was how the game was played. Victoria had made her move, but she had underestimated something critical: his ability to dismantle a foundation from the inside out. He wouldn't attack directly. He wouldn't engage in public battles or reckless power plays. Instead, he would chip away at the structure she had built, piece by piece, until it collapsed beneath her. A slow, methodical destruction. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, Nicholas was already in motion. The first meeting was set for noon, private, exclusive, no media presence. He arrived at the upscale restaurant precisely on time, stepping out of the sleek black car with the air of a man who still owned the world. Jameson was already waiting, nursing a glass of whiskey, his expression carefully unreadable. Pierce was beside him, his posture more hesitant, but his eyes giving away the fact that he was already considering what Nicholas had to say. "Glad you could make it," Nicholas said smoothly, sliding into the seat across from them. Jameson smirked. "Couldn't turn down a meeting with the legend himself." Nicholas chuckled, leaning back. "Flattery won't get you a better deal, but smart decisions will." Pierce shifted slightly. "Let's cut to the chase, Vaughn. What exactly are you offering?" Nicholas's smirk widened. "Perfect." Over the next hour, he laid out his proposal. Better terms, stronger returns, an exclusive position that would ensure their long-term stability. He didn't ask them to turn on Victoria outright. That wasn't how this worked. Instead, he planted the seed. Just enough doubt, just enough incentive to make them start questioning their alignment. By the time the meeting ended, Jameson and Pierce exchanged glances. "Well, think about it," Jameson finally said. Nicholas stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "Take your time, but don't take too long. You wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of history." With that, he walked away, knowing that the first crack had already formed. This wasn't just about regaining control. This was about reminding Victoria that power was never permanent. And by the time he was finished, she would learn that the hard way. Nicholas Vaughn never lost. That was the unshakable truth he had built his empire on. Every deal, every acquisition, every negotiation had one common denominator. He always came out on top. He didn't compromise, didn't make concessions, didn't tolerate weakness, and he certainly didn't allow anyone to rewrite the narrative of his success. But as he sat in his penthouse office, staring at the city skyline, something foreign settled in his chest. Something cold, sharp, and insidious. Doubt. The meeting with Jameson and Pierce had gone well, too well. The kind of, "we'll think about it," that didn't sound like an outright rejection, but felt just uncertain enough to be dangerous. He knew their type. They were waiting, calculating, measuring their options. And right now, for the first time in years, Nicholas wasn't the only option worth considering. That alone was enough to send frustration pulsing through him. He had spent years ensuring that no one could challenge him. He had designed the industry to bend to his will. But Victoria had made a move he hadn't anticipated. And that single miscalculation had caused ripples that were now threatening to become full-scale waves. Nicholas exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't finished. He wasn't finished. His intercom buzzed. "Sir," Mason's voice filtered through, calm and measured. "Victoria Hastings just agreed to a private meeting. Tonight." Her team reached out to confirm. Nicholas's fingers stilled against the glass of his whiskey tumbler. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. He had spent the last few days orchestrating a quiet but deliberate counterattack, tightening his grip, weakening her position where he could. Victoria had to know that. She had to see what he was doing. And instead of reacting, instead of pushing back, she was offering a conversation. A meeting. A moment of direct engagement. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, considering. This was a power move. Not just for her, but for him. She wanted to see where the pieces had landed, to gauge whether she had truly shifted the balance. He smirked. "Fine. Let's see what she really thinks." The private dining room was dimly lit. The kind of place meant for discreet conversations and quiet transactions between the kind of people who shaped industries from behind the scenes. Nicholas arrived precisely on time, dressed in a tailored suit that exuded effortless authority. When he entered, Victoria was already there, seated at the far end of the table, one leg crossed over the other, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked unbothered. That irritated him more than it should have. "Nicholas," she greeted smoothly, lifting her glass slightly in acknowledgement. "Right on time." "As always." He smirked, stepping forward. "Of course. I wouldn't want to keep you waiting." Victoria smiled, but it wasn't soft. It was sharp, calculated. "That's funny, considering how much time I spent waiting when we were married." Nicholas didn't flinch. "Then I suppose this is long overdue." He took the seat across from her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken history, with things that had been left unsaid for far too long. Nicholas leaned back, his expression unreadable. "So, let's hear it. You wouldn't have agreed to this unless you had something to say." Victoria took a slow sip of her wine, studying him. "I could say the same about you. You wouldn't have agreed unless you were at least a little curious about what I have to offer." Nicholas exhaled a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "I don't do curiosity. I do business. And right now, you and I are at a very interesting crossroads." She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "Go on." He met her gaze, unwavering. "You know exactly what I've been doing. You knew I'd push back. You knew I'd find the weak points in your structure and start applying pressure. And yet, here you are." sitting across from me instead of trying to shut me out." Victoria smiled, but there was something dangerous behind it. "That's because I know you, Nicholas. You don't walk away from a challenge. And neither do I." Nicholas held her stare, letting the weight of her words settle. She continued, her voice smooth, measured. "You've spent the last few days trying to dismantle what I built, trying to undo what I've done. But here's what you don't understand." She leaned in slightly, setting her glass down. "I didn't build this to fight you," she said quietly. "I built this to win, with or without you." Nicholas clenched his jaw slightly, but he didn't speak. Victoria's eyes flickered with something sharp. "You still think this is about you? That all of this was some elaborate move to get back at you, to prove something to you?" She exhaled softly, shaking her head. "You never did see past yourself, did you?" Nicholas felt something twist in his chest, an irritation he couldn't quite place, because she wasn't wrong. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I didn't move on from you, Nicholas. I evolved. And you're still standing in the same place, wondering why the ground feels different beneath your feet." For the first time in a long time, he had no immediate response. He knew how to navigate power struggles, how to dismantle competition, how to control everything. But this wasn't just business. This was her. The woman he had once thought he understood, now sitting across from him, showing him that she had become something else entirely. Something more. He exhaled slowly, tilting his head. "And yet, here we are. You still agreed to this meeting, which tells me one thing. There's still something you want from me." Victoria studied him for a long moment before smiling. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to see if you're still as predictable as you always were." Nicholas let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Be careful, Victoria. There's a thin line between confidence and overestimating your position." Victoria smirked, lifting her glass again. "Funny. I was going to say the same to you." For the first time in years, Nicholas felt off balance. And for the first time ever, he wasn't sure if he was the one still holding the winning hand. Nicholas Vaughn had spent his entire life building an empire on unshakable foundations: power, control, dominance. He had never been the kind of man who asked for permission, never been the one who waited for opportunities to come to him. He took them. He carved his own path, bent markets to his will, and ensured that no one, not investors, not competitors, and certainly not an ex-wife, could ever challenge his place at the top. And yet, as he sat in his penthouse office the morning after his meeting with Victoria, he was still replaying the conversation over in his head, dissecting every word, every glance, every subtle shift in the balance of power. She hadn't cowered. She hadn't flinched. She had spoken to him like an equal, and that was what unsettled him the most. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the Manhattan skyline stretching out before him. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the city he had once ruled without question. But now, for the first time in years, the certainty that had always lived in his chest felt unsteady. His phone buzzed. "Mason." Nicholas exhaled slowly before answering. "Talk to me," he ordered, his voice sharp, controlled. Mason didn't hesitate. Jameson and Pierce haven't made a decision yet, but they're leaning toward Victoria. If they finalize the deal, it's going to solidify her position even further. And that's not the only problem. Nicholas's grip tightened around the phone. "What else?" "Investors are still watching your next move. The board is restless. You need to act fast." Nicholas ran a hand over his jaw, his mind already working through the next steps. He had spent the last week making aggressive plays to weaken Victoria's hold, applying pressure where he could, reminding people that he was still the one in charge. But she had anticipated every single move. She wasn't reacting. She was playing ahead. And now, he was at a crossroads. He could escalate, go for a direct takeover, force Victoria's hand, throw the full weight of his resources behind crushing her before she became an unstoppable force. It would be messy, but it would work, at a cost. A public war would shake investor confidence, and if he failed, it wouldn't just be a loss. It would be a humiliation. Or he could take a different route, one that went against everything he had built himself to be, one that would require him to do something he had never done before: concede. Nicholas closed his eyes for a brief moment, weighing the options. Then, with a slow exhale, he made his decision. "I want another meeting with Victoria," he said, his voice low, firm. Mason hesitated. "You sure about that?" Nicholas opened his eyes, his gaze hard. "I don't repeat myself, Mason. Set it up." Victoria was already waiting when he arrived, seated in the same private dining room where they had met before. The moment Nicholas stepped inside, she looked up, her expression unreadable, her posture poised as if she already knew she had the upper hand. Nicholas smirked as he took his seat across from her. "You enjoy making me wait, don't you?" Victoria lifted her glass slightly. "I'd say it's only fair. I waited years for you to take me seriously." Nicholas exhaled a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Touché." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with history, with unspoken truths, with the weight of what this conversation truly meant. Finally, Victoria set her glass down, folding her hands in front of her. "So, what's it going to be, Nicholas?" He studied her for a long moment, his mind racing through the decision he was about to make. He could still walk away. He could still burn her empire to the ground, push harder, fight until there was nothing left but the ruins of whatever she had built. But as he looked at her, something shifted. Maybe it was the way she sat there, completely unafraid. Maybe it was the way she had never wavered, the way she had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was his equal, and maybe even more than that. Maybe it was the realization that he had spent so long trying to break her, only to find that she had become something stronger than he had ever imagined. He exhaled slowly. "I'm not here to fight you," he said finally, his voice measured, careful. Victoria's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't speak. Nicholas leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "You want to play in this world? Fine. You've earned it. But if you think I'm going to sit back and let you outmaneuver me, you're wrong." A slow smile curved at the corner of Victoria's lips. "Is that your way of offering a truce?" Nicholas smirked. "It's my way of offering a deal." She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "Go on." Nicholas exhaled, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "You and I both know we could drag this out. We could keep playing games, keep trying to outmaneuver each other, keep making moves until there's nothing left but scorched earth. But that's not smart business. That's just ego." Victoria hummed, watching him carefully. "And you're telling me you're willing to set your ego aside?" Nicholas chuckled, shaking his head. "Not entirely. But I'm smart enough to know that a war between us benefits no one. You're not the woman I underestimated before, Victoria. And I'm not the man who lets opportunities slip through his fingers." Victoria studied him for a long moment, something flickering in her gaze. "And what exactly are you proposing?" Nicholas leaned back, a slow smirk forming. "Partnership. Equal stakes. You and me, running this industry together." Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Victoria let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "I have to admit," she said, swirling her wine, "I didn't see that coming." Nicholas smirked. "I figured you wouldn't." She leaned forward slightly, her expression sharp, knowing. "And tell me, Nicholas, if I say no, what happens then?" Nicholas held her gaze, his smirk widening. "Then I keep coming. I keep pushing. And eventually one of us wins." Victoria inhaled deeply, considering. Then, after a long moment, she smiled. "Tell me more." Nicholas leaned in. And just like that, the game changed again.